Welcome to the Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. I'm Ward Simmons. I'm one of 6 Dharma leaders that rotates responsibility for leading on Wednesday nights. Welcome to those of you on Zoom. Looks like we've got a good crowd tonight. We've got 15 on Zoom, and I think I counted 28 in the room. So I want to start tonight's talk by asking a question. Show of hands. Anybody ever thought to yourself, I don't think this Dharma stuff's working for me? I'm seeing a few hands. All right. Anybody on Zoom? Yeah, I see some hands. So that's the right answer. The Buddha would be proud of you. The Buddha encouraged us to question things and make sure that we know for ourselves. What I want to talk about tonight is certainty in the Dharma, or lack of certainty. And so I was raised as a Lutheran, and it didn't take me so long to figure out that wasn't the spiritual path for me. Many friends are Lutherans. I admire Lutherans. Nothing against the Lutherans, but it wasn't for me. And I just couldn't bear the thought that I was supposed to follow the teachings of some spiritual leader long dead, that being Jesus, as documented in this text of questionable authority, that being the Bible. And how could anybody expect me to surrender my own judgment to all of that? And now I look around, and here I am following the teachings of a long-dead spiritual leader, the Buddha, as documented in this ancient text of questionable reliability, which is the Pali Canon. Here we are. One of the appealing features for me about the Dharma is the emphasis it places on our trusting our own knowing. And the Buddha used the word eipasiko, which is a Pali term that's usually translated as come and see for yourself. And he encouraged his followers to do just that. He encouraged people, us, to listen, to respect teachers, but in the end, we're responsible for what conclusions we reach. And one of the things I like about that is it shows great trust and confidence in each one of us. And there are a lot of spiritual traditions who aren't willing to grant that trust to their practitioners. They need to give us more direction than that. And so I really appreciate being trusted to find my own way. You know, it'd be simpler if we just had a list of answers we could go to and just look it up and get the answer, and then that's it. But that's not the path we've chosen. We've chosen a path that's more challenging. It's not easy. But it comes with work, but the reward is knowing for ourselves. So when we try to look at the historical record, this not perfect Pali Canon, it's widely recognized as the most reliable source that we have, which doesn't mean it's perfect. So some of you know this, the first several hundred years after the Buddha's death, writing was not commonly in use. And so during these centuries, the teachings were passed on orally. And the monks and nuns that preserved this record, they took great care to ensure its accuracy. But it would be unrealistic to think that errors didn't occur. I don't know, I saw a funny cartoon. It was kind of about the same thing as Jesus, and he's got his 4 disciples. I don't know much about the Bible. John and Paul, the 4. Somebody tell me. Yeah. So he's sitting there and he's talking to the 4 of them, and he says, "Now listen, pay close attention. I don't want to end up with 4 different versions of this," which is the 4 Gospels of those 4 guys, whatever their names are. So once we got to the place where the teachings could be recorded in writing, then they had to survive the next challenge, which was the human inclination to, guess what, improve upon them. So honorable, well-meaning people might say, "Gosh, I think if I just inserted a sentence, this would be more clear." And over the centuries, some of that definitely has happened. And even if there hadn't been errors because of the oral tradition, and even if people hadn't made improvements to help, there would still be the issue of translations. It went from Pali language to many different languages. And there's not always a precise word to translate into the new language for the Pali word. So it gets to be, we just have to recognize that the record is not perfect. So now that I've completely destroyed your confidence in the historical record, we might ask, why do we even bother to use this? And I think that one answer is that it's the best that we have. We will see that just like most religions, there's a diversity of ways of understanding. Some people are very literalist. They go strictly by the text. Some people look for the spirit of the teaching and try to understand it more in that vein. And then there's this wide range in between. So now back to the idea of certainty. We have some uncertainty about these teachings. I don't think we have uncertainty about the core teachings, but there's a lot of stuff. The Pali Canon is a huge body of work, and it's got a lot of stuff in it. So anybody ever had an experience where they had a lot of certainty, something happened and you just thought, wow, I got it, now I understand, it's resolved, and now I don't have to wonder anymore. Am I the only one that's ever had that experience? So one that I remember is, I was probably 3 years old, and my mother told me it was time for me to put my own shoes on, which scared me to death, because that's an adult thing, and I'm not an adult, and how can I possibly do that? So I grab a shoe and start trying to get it on my foot, and she says, no, you're putting it on the wrong foot. And I say, well, how would I know that? She said, well, see, there's this arch in your foot, and there's this arch inside the shoe, and you match them up. And I thought, wow, I got it. I understand, I can be an adult. And that lasted for a moment. And then she said, well, wait, don't put your shoes on yet. You got to put your socks on first. And I said, okay, great. Which one goes on which foot? And she said, well, it doesn't matter. Just put it on either foot. I said, no, but what about the arch? You can't. I had all this certainty, and then it was destroyed because my socks could go on either foot. So I want to talk about the Buddhist religion for a couple minutes, and I want to start by saying it is the reason we have the Pali Canon. It's the reason we have the record of for however accurate or inaccurate it is. It's the reason we have it to practice with, to learn from. And the monks and nuns who have made sure that this body of literature survived the centuries deserve great respect and great appreciation. They've devoted their lives to this so that we could learn and practice today. And I very much appreciate it. That said, the Buddhist religion is probably responsible for some of the confusion that we get when we look at the Pali Canon. And you may find other people who disagree with this statement. This is my opinion. We have to start by making a really important but subtle distinction, and it's the distinction between the Dharma and Buddhism. Buddhism is the Buddhist religion. And I would encourage you to not make the mistake of conflating those two terms, because they are not the same thing. So, like all religions, Buddhism is a belief system. It asks its followers to believe things that they can't verify in their personal experience. The Dharma, we as Dharma practitioners are encouraged not to accept what we cannot verify. Most people who think of themselves as followers of the Buddhist teaching are members of the Buddhist religion. But this religious overlay is optional. The teachings that were offered by the Buddha, they work equally well for people of any religion or of no religion. The Buddha didn't set out to found a religion. His intention was to share what he had learned about how the mind works and how to live in the world in a way that creates less suffering for ourselves and others. And some of his very dedicated and accomplished followers created a religion around his teaching after his death. And like most organized religions, over the centuries, there has been a divergence between where the religion headed, where it's ended up, and where the teachings of the founder are. So, how do we take this imperfect record of the Buddhist teachings and organize our lives and our practice around it? How do we deal with the inherent conflicts that we bump into? So I've had moments where I encountered things in the Pali Canon that I found really disturbing, and I thought, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can have confidence in these teachings. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples tonight and how I muddle through. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is how women have been treated over the centuries within the Buddhist context. So I'm going to share with you a sutta that you won't often hear quoted because it's embarrassing, but it's true and you need to know it. Initially, the Buddha only permitted men in his monastic order. And over time, women became interested and they came to the Buddha and said, can we form a women's community? No, we can't do that. Come on, please. Well, no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. So eventually he said yes. But there were 8 what are referred to as capital points or special rules for the nuns. There are actually many more than 8 special rules, but these capital points included, number 1, a bhikkhuni. So a bhikkhuni is a female monastic who has been admitted for even 100 years, must pay homage to, get up for, reverentially salute, and respectfully greet a bhikkhu, that's a male monastic, who has only been admitted 1 day. Another is, it is not allowed for bhikkhunis, females, to address discourses, teachings to bhikkhus, but it is allowed for bhikkhus to address bhikkhunis. So how's that for an eye-opener? A senior nun with decades of diligent study and practice has to defer to a 20-year-old monk who just ordained that day. No nuns may ever teach monks, but monks may teach nuns. So that was troubling to me. How could I have confidence in the teachings of the Buddha if he made that pronouncement? On its face, it seemed to me it would increase and not decrease suffering in the world. So over time, I've come to recognize something that is useful to me. It's a central misunderstanding on my part. So I was raised as a Christian, and my unrecognized, unacknowledged frame of reference for a spiritual teacher was that of being omniscient, all-knowing. But I don't think that's really a part of the story of the Buddha. He did fully awaken, I believe, to a penetrating understanding of the nature of existence, but that understanding was still housed in the form of a human being. Theravadan monk Ajahn Sumedho likes to say the personality never gets enlightened. So for me, it was a process of accepting that a fully awakened being like the Buddha could still have flaws in his understanding of ordinary day-to-day matters. And that's also reflected in the fact that the Buddha would make these pronouncements. If somebody was error-free, we would think every pronouncement they made would be correct. He would say something, he'd say, well, now we're going to do it this way. And then everybody would try doing it that way, and they'd come back and say, well, this is not working. And he'd say, oh, you're right, it's not working. Well, let's do it that way. So there was no illusion of perfection in all of his day-to-day decisions. So maybe that's why he made this pronouncement. Another possibility is it's the best he could do. Maybe the world he lived in was so confining that to give women equality would have meant the end of his teaching career in his community. Maybe it was just kind of the best he could do. And maybe that reduced suffering overall more than if he had tried to fully break down that barrier. I don't know. And another possibility is he never said that at all. Another possibility is the male-dominated tradition that preserved these teachings thought it sounded good and they put it in there. So in the end, we're left with a kind of an unsatisfying outcome. And this is where certainty and uncertainty kind of comes into play, the ability to tolerate some uncertainty. And I think that's required for us on this path. Now, the second example I'll share is the supernatural. So the Pali Canon has plenty of instances of supernatural occurrences. So let me just read a couple sentences here. This is a sutta about the Buddha's birth. When the Bodhisattva, that's the Buddha, came forth from his mother's womb, he came forth unsullied, unsmeared by water or humors or blood or any kind of impurity, clean and unsullied. It goes on to say, when the Bodhisattva came forth from his mother's womb, 2 jets of water appeared to pour from the sky. One was cool and one was warm for bathing the Bodhisattva and his mother. And then it goes on to tell us As soon as the Bodhisattva was born, he stood firmly with his feet on the ground. Then he took 7 steps facing north, and with a white parasol held over him, he surveyed each quarter and uttered the words of the leader of the herd. I am the highest in the world. I am the best in the world. I am the foremost in the world. This is my last birth. Now there is no renewal of being for me. I mean, maybe that happened. It could have happened, but it doesn't sound likely. So this whole supernatural thing, we have to somehow reconcile ourselves to the fact that the documents we rely on have that in it. When I was doing my training, my teacher training in the community Dharma leader program offered by Spirit Rock out in California, I was lucky, one of our 4 teachers was Tanisara, who is a former nun married to a former monk in the Theravadan tradition. And they've been, for almost 40 years, they've been teaching and doing this work diligently, even though they're lay practitioners now. And when she would lead us in a meditation period, the first thing she would do is chant to invite in the devas so that they could come join us in our meditation. And maybe the devas came. I don't know. But that's not my understanding. But my understanding is limited. Did the Buddha believe in celestial beings? Maybe. Did he just include them because they were the frame of reference his followers had and it was the effective way to communicate with them? Maybe. Or did somebody just add all that later? I don't know. The truth is, I don't really have to resolve all that for my own purposes. After this period of resistance to it, which has went on quite a long time, of demanding to know exactly what was true, I've come to be comfortable with not really knowing. I don't think that's the focus. Here's what I do know. The Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, it works for me. I know from my own experience that my attachments are the source of my suffering, and to whatever extent I can release those attachments, that reduces my suffering. And that is the Buddhist teaching on the Four Noble Truths. I know from my own experience that this human experience includes impermanence and suffering and selflessness. And that when we see those 3 truths clearly, then our suffering decreases and our wisdom increases. That's the Buddhist teaching on the 3 characteristics of existence. And I know from my own personal experience that cultivating a heart of kindness and compassion for others inevitably brings me greater peace and ease. And that's the Buddhist teaching on the Brahma Viharas, the 4 divine abodes. And there are so many more. But I'm going to spend less time worrying about celestial beings and less time worrying about some of the things that might be questionable. And I'm going to spend more time paying attention to what these books tell me about how to live my life and how to practice. It's been a long and meandering journey for the past 3 decades. And I've moved somewhat, I'm not there, I'm moving away from the arrogance of demanding certainty to a place of surrendering and not knowing. And what I've found is a different kind of certainty, a different kind of knowing based on my own personal experience. And I think that is what the Buddha was trying to teach us. So I'll offer that for your consideration.